Hello my friends, and welcome to this next video in this series where we shall be looking at manipulating objects. In the previous video, we've already seen what an object is, and in fact we talked about the object literal as one of the ways of creating objects in JavaScript, and it is very simple and valid way of creating objects in JavaScript. We also know that an object is used to create a structured data, so we can have properties and functionalities that are related to an object, just like we saw with the Toyota object that we created in the last video. In this video, we're going to take a look at more ways of manipulating the objects that we create in JavaScript. So I'm going to start out by creating a human object. So I'm going to say const human equals object like this. And inside of this object, we're going to have properties and functionalities that a human can have. And what are some of the properties that a human can have? As a human, we can have names, right? In fact, we have first name, last name, and other kind of names. So I'm going to say fname because I want to create a first name for this human object. And I'm going to make it Dominic. And I can also have a last name, right? So I'm going to say all name, and then I'm going to make it a berry, like so. So now we have two properties, fname and lname, for this human object. But instead of doing it this way, I want to show us a better way of doing it actually. So we can use something called an array to store this first name and last name. It is a better way to do it. And of course, we've seen what an array is in previous videos, right? So we can start out by calling this array something like names. And then I'm going to put an array right here. So for this array, I'm going to have Dominic, and then I'm going to have a berry, like so. All right. And I want to store some other thing, some other property for this human object. And I can do age because we all have an age property. So I'm going to say age, and I'm going to say 20 like this. Of course, I'm not 20, but then don't tell anyone. Okay, it's just for coding practice. And the next thing I'm going to give is hobbies. So as humans, we all have hobbies, the things that we love to do. And I'm going to make this hobby an object. So of course, we can have objects instead of another object. All right, so I want to make this hobbies an object, and I want to categorize the hobbies that I have. So when it comes to sports, I'm going to say sports, and then what do I do for sports? So I play badminton. I can say badminton like this. And then when it comes to something that has to do with education, so when it comes to something that has to do with education, I can say I love reading. So right here you see that we have names property for this human object, and the name is an array. Right here we have the age, which is just a number, and we have hobbies, which is an object. Now, how do we begin to access the properties that exist for an object? That is what we're going to see next. In trying to access some of the properties or the properties that exist inside of an object, we can use the dot notation. We've actually been using the dot notation, but I just want to let us know specifically that we can use the dot notation to access the properties that exist inside of an object. So I'm going to save this scripting.js file and go here to my browser's console, and I'm going to try to access some of those properties. So I'm going to say something like human dot names, and when I save or when I click on enter, I have Dominic a berry. So the array right here gets returned to me. Okay, but what if I just wanted to access the first item instead of the array? So I can say something like human dot names dot, should I say dot? No, I'm going to say 0. Of course, we've worked with an array, and we know that we can access the items that exist inside of an array using this sort of notation. All right, so when I click on enter, you see that Dominic gets returned to me. If we wanted to access the second thing in the array, we just have to replace the 0 with 1 right there. Okay, and in fact, we're going to do that and say human dot names, and then open this square bracket, and then 1, and then close it and enter, and we have a berry returned right here to us. And what if we wanted to access the age property? We're going to say age, or we're going to start with human dot age, and simply we get 20 back. What about the hobbies? So we're going to say human dot hobbies, and of course the object gets returned to us. Now you can see that we have an object right here. So how do we access the hobby that falls under sports for this particular human? So I'm going to say human dot hobbies and then dot sports, like so. So when I click on enter, you see that badminton gets returned to us. And if I'm to access the one under education, of course, I'm just going to say human.hobbies.education. And that's what I'm going to do, human.hobbies.education, like this. And I have reading returned back to me. So you can see how we're able to access the properties that exist for this human object. Another way of accessing the properties is using the square bracket notation. So instead of doing something like human.h, you can do something like human and then open this square bracket and then type the property right here. So the property should go inside of the quotation marks. I'm going to say age like this, and I'm going to close the square bracket and click on enter, and then we have 20 returned to us. Note that if you do not use the quotation mark, it's not going to work. So if you access something like human and then open this one and set age like this, now we have a reference error saying can't find variable age. So make sure to wrap it inside of the quotation mark. And what if we wanted to access the names? So we're going to say human and then open the square bracket, and then I'm going to say names, right, and close it, and then we have Dominic Ebere returned to us. And of course, if we wanted to access the first thing inside of this array, you can say human and then names, right, and then we open the bracket again, and then we can use 0 or 1 or 2 or whatever to access the item inside of the array. Okay, so when I click on enter, you see that we have Dominic returned to us. So now we've seen that we can use a dot notation and the square bracket notation to access properties that exist for a particular object. That is very cool. Let me clear out my console so that we can have an empty space right here. All right, so now that we've seen the dot notation way of accessing the properties and the square bracket way of accessing the properties, now it's time to make the distinction between the two. Actually, they're both valid ways of accessing properties that exist for an object, but there are times when we can only use the square bracket notation and not the dot notation. What do I mean by that? First of all, I'm going to start out by creating a function. So I'm going to say function, and then what do I want to call my function? I'm going to call it declaring, and then open this, and then this right here. This declaring function is going to take a parameter, so I'm going to name it any property, like so. And inside of this function, I'm going to try to access a property that exists on this human. So I'm going to say human, and of course I'm going to use the square bracket, and I'm going to say any property, like so. And I'm going to log this to the console. So let me take this and say console.log human any property, like this. What am I trying to do? What I want to do is that I'm going to call this function, and then I'm going to pass it an argument. This right here is a parameter, and whatever I pass when calling the function will be seen as the argument. So, and what sort of argument am I supposed to pass to this declaring function? That argument that I'm going to pass is supposed to be a property that exists on this human object. Because remember, right here inside of the function, we're saying human and then giving it any property. So I'm going to say declaring names. All right. So as soon as I call this function, declaring names, we're going to have Dominic Ebere printed on the console. Let me save this file. Oh, and it's saying can't find variable names. And why is that so? Because I'm supposed to wrap these names right here instead of quotation marks. So let's do that. So I'm going to take this one off, and then I'm going to say names. So whatever thing, whatever argument that we're going to be passing to this declaring function is supposed to be a property that exists on this human object, because we're trying to use that property, or we're trying to access what that property is, the content or the value of that property right here on this line. Okay, so now when I save, you see that Dominic Ebere has been printed on the console. If we wanted to access age, then we can just say age and save. Now we see 20 printed on the console. If we wanted to access hobbies, we can say hobbies and save. And now we have sports, education, badminton, reading for sports and education respectively. And if you type something that does not exist, that is a property that does not exist on this human object, such as dancing skill, and save, you see we get undefined, because of course this dancing skill does not exist on this human object. Okay, Now let's get back to this declaring function. You see that right here we're saying human and we're using the square bracket notation and then having this any property inside of this. So this any property will be any of the properties that exist on this human object, okay, when we call the function. But what if we wanted to say human dot any property, like so? Human dot any property instead of using human and the square bracket notation. Let me save this, and we're getting undefined still. Let's say it's because dancing skill does not exist on this human object. So I'm going to say something like names, and when I save, you see that we're still getting undefined, all right? And that's because we're using the dot notation right here. Now, the thing to note is that when we use the dot notation, it is supposed to be a particular property that exists on this human object or on the object that we are working with, in this case human. So human.anyProperty does not exist right here in this human object. You only have names, age, and hobbies. So you can't do something like human.anyProperty. And so you can see that the square bracket way of accessing the property that exists on an object is preferable. And in fact, we can only do it using the square bracket notation. In this case, the dot notation does not work. So I'm going to take it back and I'm going to convert it back to any property. So remember, each time you're calling a dot on an object, make sure that the next thing you're going to type should be something that exists as a property on that particular object. So right now, when I save, we get back Dominic and the berry printed on the console. Okay, so because we wanted to do it this way instead of this function, we are going to use the square bracket notation way of accessing the property. So that's the distinction to note when it comes to using the dot notation way of accessing properties and the square bracket notation way of accessing properties that exist on an object. So right now, we've already looked at ways of accessing the properties that exist on an object. Now let's talk about setting a property on a particular object or even updating the ones that already exist on that object. To start out, I'm going to delete these ones we have here and I'm going to clear out my console right here. So at the moment, we have that names, that is this property names, that exists inside of the human object is having an array of Dominic Ebere like this. But what if I just change my mind and then I want to change the names property to something else? So I can say human.names equals, and then I can give it whatever value that I want to give it. Okay, so let's say I just want to give it a string actually, and I'm just going to say Dominic Ebere like so and save. Now, when I try to access this human, I'm no longer going to get this array. Instead, I'm going to get this string right here that has Dominic Ebere. Now, let's try to access the human object in our console. And you can see that names is now Dominic Ebere, no longer an array. Okay? And it becomes clearer when I say human.names. You can see we just get Dominic Ebere printed. That is the string right here, no longer the array. So this is one way we can use to set the property on an object. That is, in this case, we're actually updating, right? And of course, we can also use the square bracket way of doing things. Okay, I can also say names like so. And when I save and come here and try to say human.names, we get Dominic Ebere still on the console. So what if we wanted to add new things to this human object? Right now, the human object only has names, age, hobbies, okay? Sometimes we want to add new things, new properties to the object. So let me delete this actually, and then I'm going to add something new, that is a new property to this human object. So let me say something like human dot net worth is equals $100 billion. Like so. So let's assume that my net worth currently is $100 billion. So let me save this. And now let's try to access the human object. So right here, you can see that net worth has been added as one of the properties of the human object. So my net worth is $100 billion. Of course, it becomes clearer if I say human.net worth $100 billion. And what if I wanted to add some more property, that is new properties. I can also say human dot and then introduce that property. So let's say I want to add an eye color. So I'm going to say eye color, and what is it going to be? It's going to be blue. So let me say that my eye color is blue. So I'm going to say blue like this and save. So if I still try to access the human object, so you can see that eye color has been added and the eye color is blue. And of course, it's clearer when I say human dot eye color like this, I get blue. So now you can see that we can add new properties to an object by using this kind of code or by doing this way. And we can also edit or update the already existing property on the object. So if I still want to say human.age, assuming I want to update my age, I can say 22. All right. So when I save this and still try to access human.age, you can see now is now 22, no longer 20 right here. And so these are the ways we can update or set new properties that exist on an object. And these things are usually done when the code is already running. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk to us about is this property. Let's look at it and understand what it is about. Now, looking at our human object, we just have properties for this human object. There is no functionality yet for this object. So what I'm going to do is, first of all, clear out my browser's console, and I'm going to delete these ones right here. And then let me add a function to this human object. So right here, I'm going to have a function that says bio, okay? And what is bio? Bio is just something that talks about an individual, right? So I want this bio function to log some things to the console, something about the human object. So you can say something like, hello, my name is Dominic Ebere, I am 20 years old, and so on and so forth. All right. So I'm going to say console.log, and I want to use template literal. So I'm going to introduce the backticks, and I'm going to say, hello, my name is, and then I want to use these names. I want to access the names of this object. Okay. I'm going to say the $, and then like this. All right. So instead of here, I'm going to say this dot names. So right here, I'm saying, hello, my name is this dot names. Okay. So that's what this bio function is going to do. Let me save this. So I'm going to say right here, human dot bio like this. Remember, the bio is a function, right? So when I save, we'll have, hello, my name is Dominic Ebere. If you look closely, you can see that the comma is right here, and that's because of the way we've used this right here. So I can say something like this dot names, and then use a square bracket right here and say 0. So my name is Dominic, because Dominic is the first thing in the array, and I'm going to say this dot names, all right, and then 1. So when I save, now you can have, hello, my name is Dominic Ebere without the comma right there. Let me put this on its own line so that we can see things all at once. So what does this means? This right here, these keywords. So what does this keyword mean? This keyword, what does it mean? So it is just referring to the human object, okay? It refers to the human object. And in fact, you can see that instead of saying this, you can say something like human.names. We're still getting, hello, my name is Dominic Ebere. So why is it that we use this keyword instead of saying human.names? All right, that's the thing we're going to answer in the next video when we talk about constructors. Okay, but for now, we just know that this right here represents the object that we're talking about. That is the object that this bio function exists in, referring to the human object right here. So it's as good as saying human.names, but usually we'd use the this keyword. Now, before we go, let's actually try to work with our HTML file. So what we're going to do is going to create an input or some inputs on our HTML page, and then we're going to type something into this HTML input element, and then we're going to access them using our JavaScript, and then we're going to add them to our human object. All right, so let's go. Now to do that, I'm going to go to my home.html. So right here, I'm going to have a section, and then within the section, I'm going to have a div, and I'm going to have those input elements that I want to work with. So first of all, I'm going to have a label for the input, all right? And then after the label, I'm going to have the input. So it's going to be an input of type text. That means we just want to type normal text into that input. So let me first of all forget about the name, and I'm going to give it an ID of f name or first name if you want, like so. And then this label is going to say first name, like this, with a capital letter, okay? And let me save this. Now you can see we're having first name, and then we're having this input where we can type something. So that's what this input is for. The input is to have the box right here where we can type something, and then the label is just this first name right here. In fact, let me put the colon. Now I'm going to have another input down there. So I'm going to copy all of this, the whole div, Ctrl C, and then right there, I'm going to paste it. And now this one, instead of being the first name, is going to be second name or last name. Let me make it a last name. And then the ID is going to be last name, like so. So when I say we have first name and then we have last name, they are close to each other. So I'm going to have a break tag right here. Let me introduce a couple of them. So I can space the first name and the last name. So now we have something to type into, all right? So what I want to do is actually capture the input, whatever it is that we're going to be typing inside of this first name and last name, and then we'll store it inside of an object, and we're going to see the content of the object, all right? So now let's go back to our scripting.js file. So here is our scripting.js file. What I'm going to do is actually to delete all of the code we have currently. So delete everything. So now instead of the scripting.js file, we're going to have an object. So I'm going to create a person object. Let me call it person. So instead of this person, we're going to have the names property, first name and last name property. Okay. So I'm going to say f name, and then I'm going to set it to be an empty string. And then I'm going to have L name, which stands for the last name, and I'm going to make it an empty string as well. So what we want to do is to get an input from this first box, all right, as the first name, and store it inside of the F name, and get an input from this second box as the last name and store it inside of here, all right? And you can see that if I say console.log person to the console, we're having F name and last name to be empty strings. Now, let me delete this one. So how do we actually capture those things that we're going to be typing inside of the box and store it as the F name and last name, or L name if you like? So I'm going to have a function first of all. So let me have a function that says function capture names. So now I'm going to first of all look at my home.html file, and you can see that this input box right here, the first one has an ID of first name, and the second box has an ID of last name. So I'm going to say something like document.getElement by ID, and I'm going to say first name, and I'm going to say .value. All right. So this right here is capturing whatever thing we're going to be typing inside of this box right here, the box with the ID of first name. And after capturing this, I want to store it inside of a variable that says const my first name is equals document.getElement by ID first name. Let me put this on its own line so we can see everything at once. And for the second box, for the second input box right here, I'm going to say const my last name equals document.getElement by ID, and then I'm going to say last name dot value. And let me bring this one down so we can see everything at once. So we now have my first name variable and my last name variable right here, and they are all going to have whatever it is that we type into the first box or into the second box. Now what do we want to do? After capturing the value that we're going to be typing inside of the box, we now want to store those values as the F name and the L name values right here. So we're going to say something like person, and then dot F name is now going to be equals my first name, like this. And of course, person dot L name is going to be equals my last name, like this. So let me save this. right here. How do we actually now type? Because when we type something, let's say I type this rubbish right here, and I type another one, and nothing is happening here. And if I try to access my person object, I'm still having F name as an empty string and the L name as an empty string, even after typing all of this. And if we're to type something more proper, so if I say Dominic, if I say Ebere, and still try to access the person like this, we're still getting the same empty string. So what is happening? Now the thing is, we need this function to run only when we actually click on a button or submit something. Now let's call the capture names function here. Is anything happening? Nothing is happening. Let's try to access the person object. It is still an empty string. Now even if we type something like Dominic and Ebere, it's not going to change anything. So we still try to access the person object. It is still empty. All right. So what we want to do, we only want to call these capture names when we probably click on a button. You know how you have a form on an HTML page, and then you click on a button and then it's going to submit a form. So what we want to do is to have a button that when you click, it's now going to capture these names, the values that we type right here, Dominic and Ebere, and store it inside of the person F name and L name. So in order to do that, let's go to our HTML page right here. And after the div right here, I'm going to create a button and I'm going to say submit. Okay. And then I'm going to add something called an event handler. That is, what should happen when we click on this submit button. First of all, let me save this. After saving this, you can see that we have the submit button right here. So what we want to do is when we click on submit, after typing something instead of this first name box and the last name box, we're going to update the value of the F name and the L name right here. So in order to do that, we're going to add that on click event handler. So I'm going to say on click, all right? That is, whenever this button is clicked, what should happen? So when we click on this button, we want this function to run, the capture names function to run. So I'm going to say capture names like this. So this function should run whenever we click on the button. And of course, if the function runs, we're going to grab whatever is written here. That's what we're doing on line 7. And we're going to grab whatever is written here. That is what is on line 9. And then we're now going to set the F name and the L name to those values. And so when we try to access the person object, they'll be filled with those values. All right. So let me remove this one right here. And of course, save my scripting.js file and save the home.html file. And before we even try to type anything inside of the boxes, let's try to access the person object. It is still empty. All right. So now let's try to type something inside of the box. I'm going to say Dominic, and then I'm going to say Ebere. And now I'm going to click on the button. So I've clicked on the button, right? Now let's try to access the person. And now you can see we have F name as Dominic and L name as Ebere. Of course, there are better ways of doing this, but I just wanted to show us that we can take an input from our HTML page and we'll store it inside of an object like this person object. And then this person object can be manipulated further if we want. We can send the person object to a database. We can get a structured data of first name, last name, age, and so on and so forth. And we can send it somewhere, or we can just store it on our computer. All right. So now we're having Dominic and Ebere. And of course, if we try to refresh this and maybe type something like Alex, George, and click on submit. All right. And now try to access the person objects. Now we're having Alex and George right here. And that is very cool. So in order to wrap up with this video, I know it's really been a long video. So what we can do is actually solve a problem. All right. I'm going to write out a set of instructions that you're to follow and solve this code challenge. So what I want you to do is to create a person object with the property of best food. And that best food is to be an empty string. Now on your HTML page, create an input box such that whenever you type something inside of the input box, in this case, whatever your best food is, it could be cereal, it could be rice, it could be meat, it could be chicken, whatever your best food is. You type inside of the input box, and then you make sure that you store whatever you typed inside of that best food property that you created on the person object. And now when you log person object to the console, you will see that the value is no longer empty. Instead, it is now whatever thing you have typed inside of the input box. You can pause the video and work on the challenge, and I'm going to give you the solution to this challenge next. Now, to solve this code problem, I'm going to actually delete all of this, okay? Because I'm going to clutter up our working space, and I'm going to save my scripting.js file. So the first thing I want to do is to create a person object. So I'm going to say const person is equals an object, and then inside of the object, I'm going to have best food, and it is going to be set to an empty string like this. Okay, good. Now I'm going to save my scripting.js file and then go to the home.html file. So I'm going to delete all the thing I have from my section, and I can simply just have a div, and I'm going to have a label, and this label is going to say best food, and then I'm going to have input, and I'm going to give this input an ID of best food. Okay, I'm going to have a semicolon, and when I save, now we're having best food. Great. So now I'm going back to my scripting.js file, and I'm going to write a function. So I'm going to say function our best food, and then inside of the function, I'm going to capture whatever thing we're going to be typing inside of the box right there. Okay, I'm going to say document.getElement by ID. So what's the ID of our input box? The ID is best food. So I'm going to grab that. I'm going to say best food dot value. So I'm going to store it inside of a variable. So I'm going to say const best food is equals this right here. So let me put this on the second line so that we can see everything at once. So after capturing the value that we type here instead of the best food variable, what I'm going to do is say person dot best food is equals best food like this. Don't be confused by these names that I've used. And in fact, in order not to let you be confused, I'm going to use my best food. So person dot best food is this one right here. It's going to be equals to my best food. Now I'm going to save this. I'm going to add a button right here. So I'm going to say button, and then I'm going to say save best food. And then I'm going to give it an onClick event handler that's going to call that function we wrote here, which is our best food function. So I'm going to say our best food like this. So right here you can see we're having save my best food. And let me have a BR tag right here, so we can have this button on the next line. So right now we have on the next line that button. And in fact, let me add more BR tag. Now, when we go to this right here to our best food, so for the value here, I'm going to type akara. All right, so when I click on save best food, now let's try to access the person object, and then you can see that best food is now akara. So that's how you can get an input from your HTML element or from your HTML page like this, and then you can store that value or whatever it is you're getting right there as the value of a property of an object. All right, I hope you really tried this code challenge. It's going to help you improve and learn better. Okay, all right. So in the next video, let's talk a bit more about object constructors and how they relate to this keyword. See you in the next video. Please, my friends, like my videos and subscribe to my channel. It will go a long way in helping me to create videos like this.